Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We have a lot to get to in this latest episode. We're going to talk about some key recruiting visits that are being scheduled. Last time we had Tyler Calvaruso on, our recruiting insider. He gave us 6 key names to know in the 2026 cycle. We're going to circle back to a few of them, but bring you several new names that may not be aware of at this stage, who have scheduled their official visits to Happy Valley, guys who could ultimately end up being pieces of this 2026 recruiting class, which currently ranks inside the top 5 at national rankings at 24/7 Sports. We have spent a lot of time on recent episodes of this podcast breaking down the addition of Stan Drayton, new running backs coach, who we'll get a chance to speak to early next week at a press conference here on campus. That hasn't happened quite yet, but we've got a lot of feedback from a lot of different folks, and we brought that to Lions247.com and the podcast. And we're going to do that again right now. Someone who has some firsthand experience covering Stan Drayton at the college level, and that's Mike Roach. He's one of our analysts here at 24/7 Sports. Does a great job covering the recruiting scene. You've probably seen his content pop up at Lions247.com. Just a few years back, though, he was focused in on that Texas Longhorns recruiting beat, had a chance to really learn about Stan Drayton more than we have to this point. We'll get our chances in the months and years ahead potentially here at Penn State. But Mike, thanks for jumping on with us and giving us a bit more perspective on Penn State's newest staff member.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys for having me.
Well, when we kind of look at Stan Drayton's time at Texas, it was a pretty long run, 2017 through 2021, before he went off to take the Temple job. And I think clearly the name that people are going to gravitate towards at that running back position at Texas is Bijan Robinson, an eventual top 10 pick in the NFL draft, the guy who approached 2,000 total offensive yards last year with the Atlanta Falcons, his second year in the league. We talked about the breakout sophomore campaign that he had in Stan Drayton's last year at Texas on our most recent episode. Can you break down and review that process of bringing Bijan Robinson to campus as the number 1 overall running back recruit in that 2020 recruiting cycle, and ultimately his early success, and maybe how Stan Drayton played a role in not only getting him to Austin, but helping situate him as a premier running back across the country, an eventual Doak Walker Award winner?
Yeah, well, Stan Drayton is, I mean, if you looked at the time I covered Texas, probably, I covered mainly through the Charlie Strong years, the Tom Herman years, and the beginning of the Steve Sarkisian era, the most tumultuous time probably in program history. Stan Drayton was like the constant. He was the guy that Tom Herman brought in people were most excited about because of his history as a recruiter, a developer, and a coach. And, he was he was held over by Steve Sarkisian for that purpose. And I think would have been at Texas as long as he wanted to be, had he not gotten the Temple job. So obviously a guy that I think holds a ton of respect in the industry. And then as a recruiter, I remember the Robinson recruitment well. He was the difference. Bijan Robinson was headed to Ohio State, and it was a back and forth battle. But I think in the end, he really felt the personal connection with Stan Drayton most. He talked a lot about he liked that Stan Drayton was a man of God and Bijan Robinson is a man of faith. And, he looked at that as the two had a really strong bond together, and was a big reason why Bijan chose to ultimately go to Texas. And I think, if you dig down into it, there were a lot of reasons, but the biggest reason talking to Bijan was because of Stan Drayton.
With Drayton, he had certainly cachet in the college football world, being on Urban Meyer's staff at Ohio State and Florida, winning national titles there. But I want to go back to something you said. As that staff was being assembled years ago, you said the most excitement was really on Drayton. Why was that excitement there among Longhorns fans when we kind of look back in the rearview mirror?
Well, Herman's initial staff was mostly guys he brought with him from the University of Houston who hadn't coached at a high level, but Drayton had been at Ohio State, had been at Florida. At that time, the most exciting win he had on his resume was Ezekiel Elliott, who he had gotten at Ohio State. So he was known, he had this reputation as a national recruiter. And I think running back coaches often get the reputation of like, oh, it's not that hard to coach running backs, but he is generally known as one of the better technical running back coaches in the country as well.
I think with the recruiting acumen with Drayton, he's a guy that, is from Ohio, went to college at Pennsylvania. He's bounced around different territories. How would you describe the way he recruited, not just at the running back position, but I'd imagine he was utilized in other recruitments during his time with the Longhorns? Is he a guy who has some coast-to-coast reach in terms of his ties and, again, going off of his record here at the college level? Or are there any specific areas of the country that you recall maybe being more of his bread and butter?
I think Florida and the St. Louis area were two of the biggest. He's was really good in that St. Louis area, and then obviously, a Pennsylvania native himself. In the Midwest, he was pretty strong. They didn't delve into it a lot because there were a lot of running back options in Texas. They didn't really have to go far to do it. But when he needed to, he could go to Arizona and get Bijan Robinson. There were other, I think one of the more underrated aspects of Stan Drayton is his evaluation ability. When you look at Jonathan Brooks, who had 6 or 7 offers, I think when Texas offered him, they were the first school to offer. Nobody else really jumped in. We wondered all year, like, are they really going to take this kid? Why is nobody else pursuing him? He ends up being, a second-round draft pick in one of the better parts of their offense. So he really saw the vision there as well. And I think that he's the kind of guy that he's a relationship guy. And so I think he has a lot of bonds across the country, and he's well thought of in a lot of places. So he's the kind of guy that I think if you get him in front of a kid and their family, he can do a lot of good work with them.
I'm glad you brought up Brooks. I didn't realize that he was, that maybe viewed as that kind of a shaky recruiter, or what was he going to be, a Texas type recruit all the way. But I think a lot of people view Drayton and they say, okay, you got Ezekiel Elliott. He had success. Well, I think a lot of people probably could have predicted Ezekiel Elliott was going to be successful when he left high school in St. Louis. Same deal for Bijan Robinson. When you're the number 1 recruit and a 5-star in the country, you're expected to produce. And people don't pay a lot of attention to who the position coach is because they just think you're going to show up and be the man. But with someone like Brooks, it shows a little bit of a differentiating eye out there in the recruiting world. Can you talk about that contrast and his ability to go face-to-face with the number 1 recruit in the country, and then also maybe convince some parents out there, maybe convince his own coaching staff that this guy may not look like a Texas-type player, maybe now a Penn State-type player, but in his mind's eye and as he projects it forward, there needs to be some trust in his evaluation?
Yeah, I think that in the past, especially when he was at Texas, the head coach always had total trust in him when it came to his evaluations. I think he knew what he wanted in his room. And so when he looked at Jonathan Brooks, and I remember, we cover recruiting, you look at things at face value, you see a kid who no one's ever heard of at the time they offer him. He doesn't have any other offers. And then generally, a school like Texas offers Jonathan Brooks, everybody else starts jumping in. Nobody jumped in. I mean, it was all year long. Jonathan Brooks went on to put together one of the best senior seasons in Texas high school football history, basically willed his team to a state championship appearance. And when you looked past nobody's really after him and looked into the film, you saw all the tools that have made him like an NFL runner. But I think that was one of the biggest stories of anything I ever covered was Texas, a school that can offer just about anybody, went after this kid, found him, evaluated him, trusted in him, and that was all on Stan Drayton. And so I think that he had the confidence of the head coach, whether it be Tom Herman or Steve Sarkisian, to go do his thing and find his guys. And then, like you said, when you put him in front of a 5-stars family, he presents extremely well. He's a very well put together guy, very professional in his approach. I think he's extremely relatable, even though he's older. I think a lot of times you'll see younger guys in those roles thriving. I think that he resonates with parents and he resonates with mature kids. That's what Bijan Robinson was. He was a really mature kid out of high school, and he had the resume to back it up. I mean, when you're flexing Ezekiel Elliott to Bijan Robinson, that's a good resume. And now he can turn around and say, okay, I also had Bijan Robinson. He had some guys. I don't remember his exact time at Florida, but obviously had some guys there as well. And he's got a really strong resume to put together.
I've learned a lot about it. One that stood out from early on in his career, Brian Westbrook at Villanova, and what he was able to do with him. And then Carlos Hyde, I know he didn't recruit him, but the success that he had in that room and growing up a bit with the Buckeyes. I want to circle back to his retention on the roster, because that's probably one of the biggest compliments an assistant coach could get is when a new head coach comes through and they have every opportunity to push that reset button, and they usually do in a lot of different ways. But if they say, hey, I want you to stick around, you are our position coach, if you will, please stay on campus. That happened for Stan Drayton at Texas when Sarkisian came on board. Was that something you anticipated when there was a coaching move? And ultimately, what would you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think when we looked at the staff he could potentially put together, Drayton was the guy we circled as, okay, this is the guy you keep for continuity. If you think about it at the time, Texas was struggling, but the running back room was incredibly strong. And, Drayton had put that together. that Bijan Robinson was coming off of a really breakout season. And I think that Sarkisian looked at it and said, I want the continuity here. I like that this guy kind of gets what we're trying to do, and he's bought into what I want to do. And it makes it really easy when he's a strong recruiter, a strong developer, and a guy that's well-liked by everybody on the staff.
Now, he walked away from that running back room before Bijan Robinson's Stoke Walker year. And look, we just saw Jaywan Sider leave Penn State. He's got Nick Singleton and Katron Allen as rising seniors. It happens. But he left for a head coaching job. I'd imagine it wasn't an easy situation to walk away from. But can you kind of take us back to that moment in time when he becomes the head coach in Philadelphia? He leaves Texas. And maybe what were the factors that tipped it in him going that route?
I think like any coach, he had aspirations of being a head coach. And I know, being a guy from Pennsylvania, that probably felt like a good fit to him. And so, an opportunity he couldn't pass up. And I think had the opportunity not come up, he'd have been happy staying at Texas. He seemed to like it in Austin. And, obviously talent was coming in and out the door, and he was going to be successful for a long time there. But for him, I think it was just the aspirations of giving, the head coaching run a shot. And, Tipple's that's a tough job to win at, I guess, unless you're Matt Rule. It's a tough place to go. And I'm sure he's probably got some regrets about how it played out there. But I think that, for him, he'd probably have bigger regrets if he didn't take that chance.
Is there anything else we need to know about that running back room at Texas? Any other names that were very notable? I believe they had Rashawn Johnson, who's gone on and played some NFL ball. What else do we need to know about Stan Drayton's time as the man?
Yeah, I mean, Rashawn Johnson, another success story, a guy recruited at quarterback by Texas. And when he got to Austin, they were like, we're good at quarterback. We need a running back. We need a guy that can come in and play right away. And, to Rashawn Johnson's credit, he bought into that idea. And Stan Drayton and Tashard Choice both, in combination developed him into, again, another NFL guy. And I think that knowing Rashawn in high school, he really wanted to be a quarterback. I don't think that was an easy decision for him, but I think that he had enough trust in Drayton at the time when they made the decision to know that that was going to be the best thing for his future.
I want to finish here. Penn State's looking for a running backs coach, and in the midst of that process last week, all of a sudden, Texas is looking for a running backs coach because they have Tashard Choice go off to the NFL, and ultimately Texas hires Clemson's Chad Scott at the end of the day. But I'm sorry, West Virginia's Chad Scott at the end of the day, and he was a guy that we had on our initial candidate board as well. But was there any rumblings down there that Stan Drayton and a reunion could be in play when you guys were kind of – I know you're not on the Texas beat anymore, but anything that you heard of where Texas may have been taking a look up toward him again?
Yeah, and I was on vacation for a lot of it, so I wasn't checking in a ton, but I know his name came up. I mean, it made a lot of sense. He had familiarity with the staff, still some guys in that room. And, when Texas GM Brandon Harris – was Stan Drayton's assistant running back coach, is basically his analyst at the time. Obviously a ton of connections there. I think the name came up, but to me, even, when Notre Dame opened, I told Tom Loy, who works for our network, I said, Stan Drayton would make a lot of sense for them. He just got fired at Temple. He's got connections to the Midwest. And then when the dominoes fell that way, I thought, well, now he makes even more sense for Penn State being a Pennsylvania guy. So, it felt like the instincts. And for him, I don't know how much being back home was important for him. I haven't talked to Stan in years, probably since he left Texas. But I think anytime you get an opportunity, especially for a guy that grew up in Pennsylvania to coach at a place like Penn State, Texas is great. That's a great place to be. But I think probably a lot of kids who grow up in Pennsylvania have a dream to be at Penn State at one point in time. And so, again, that's another nice little check mark for his bucket list, probably.
Any forecast from you, Mike? He's working with two guys coming off 1,000-yard seasons. It feels like, it doesn't have to really – it's not a reclamation project by any means. What do you think about this opportunity for both parties in 2025?
I think that what you're going to see is you've got two really talented guys, like you mentioned. I think, we talk Nick Singleton is like a mythical figure in our national team circle. We love him so much, and we root for him every week because we were so high on him. And Katron Allen's awesome. And so I think what you're going to see is it just continue to tighten things up. He's going to focus a lot more on details, ball security, that that type of thing. Those guys are talented enough. They're going to go do what they're going to go do. I don't think he's going to change much there, but you'll see some finer details. I think he's big on blitz pickup and things like that, and so I think you'll see just some more tightening of their skills.
We look forward to meeting Stan in a press conference setting next Monday. And for now, Mike, we appreciate you for helping us paint the picture a little bit more here on the podcast. Welcome back from your vacation, and sorry to make this the first thing on your task list coming back off it, but thank you for taking the time.
Not a problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We'll turn our attention now towards Penn State football recruiting. We'll do that with our resident recruiting insider, Tyler Calvaruso. Tyler, welcome back to the show. We just spent some time breaking down Stan Drayton. I know you and I did that last Friday when we sat down to record. The news had just really started to surface that this was indeed going to be the match for Penn State's job opening. You and I broke that down in terms of the recruiting ramifications. You spoke with Kaman Spell from the 2027 class. You spoke with Messiah Minkins from the 2026 class, who has locked in an official visit. So if you missed that part of the conversation on Drayton, it's all there for you Friday. We're not going to rehash it right now, but Tyler, obviously a lot of excitement about this running backs coach. I guess I'll just start here before we move on to the other topics we got to get to. Anything new to bring to our show here in the last week that you've maybe heard or picked up regarding this coaching move on the recruiting trail?
Well, first things first, you got to look at the state of the running back board, which is very much in flux post J1 Sider. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just there's a lot of evaluating going on right now because that board's obviously going to take a whole different look and feel now that you've got a new position coach at the helm. There are some familiar names sticking around on that board, though, some names we've discussed throughout the cycle. Brian Bonner, a top 100 back from California. We touched on him even before Sider left as a guy who wanted to make it out to Penn State during the spring. He's going to do that. I expect Penn State to get an official visit as well with the way things stand there. A couple of other familiar guys beyond that. Obviously the priority right now, one of the priorities at least, is keeping Messiah Minkins on board with a bunch of other schools coming calling. Baylor offered earlier this week. Indiana offered earlier this week. Guys like Javion Mallory down in Florida. Guys like Carson Baker. I almost said Carson Beck, because his name's been in the news. But Carson Baker down in Georgia. And Gerard Burnett in Tampa as well. We wrote about him in January. And it was kind of difficult for me, at least at that point, to pick up where exactly he was going to fall on the board. I think he's up there in that pecking order, working on figuring out what exactly his visit plans are moving forward. But there are some familiar names. I expect some new names to potentially pop up as well heading into spring ball once that evaluation period starts as well. But when you hammer down what's going on with running back recruiting right now, priority one, keeping Minkins because you know who he is. He's a tangible factor in this 26 class. And then you move past that, formulate the board, and work with some of the names you already had on the board pre-Drayton.
And remember, J1 Sider and Messiah Minkins did not lose each other's numbers. They will be in contact moving forward as well. Look, we just heard a lot about Drayton's recruiting reach, and he's brought in guys who were maybe under the radar. He's brought in guys who were the number one recruits in the country. It'll be fun to follow. I know Tyler Calvaruso will be doing his best to bring you all of the latest on running back recruiting at lions247.com. But let's switch gears a little bit now and talk about this official visit schedule that is brewing at a rapid pace right now for Penn State. You had an overview piece up this week where beyond 30, we might be beyond 40 names at this point who are in that 2026 cycle, currently high school juniors. Next season, they'll be high school seniors, and many of them will be on a college campus next January and underway with work. So this thing goes fast. These guys are trying to figure out, do their homework, get to campuses face-to-face, and then come up with answers. And so we're going to go through some of those names. We're going to skim through a few of them real quick, Tyler, because three of these guys that we discussed already last week, and if people missed our episode last Friday, I said to Tyler, pick 6 names that we got to know about for the 2026 class and bring it to the table, and let's talk about it. A few of those guys have scheduled official visits. I'll throw their names your way. Luke Wafel out of New Jersey. You've got Iheanacho, the five-star that we talked a lot about out of Maryland. He has made a decision. And then also Connor Salmon out of the Bowl School in Maryland, one of the top receiver targets. I believe we hit on all 3 of them last time you were on, and they have all locked in official visits.
Yeah, Joey O'Brien too.
Joey O'Brien, number one player in the state of Pennsylvania, a guy that's from the same high school as Abdul Carter, another guy we talked about last Friday. I'm forcing people, if you didn't listen to it, go back last Friday. A lot of good recruiting intel there.
Yeah, we went in depth on all of those guys, and not a whole lot has changed here in the dead period. So it would just be rehashing that conversation at this point. Tuesday was official visit graphics day for those who follow along on Twitter. Penn State was sending out its OV graphics to the guys they really want in this 26 class. So you were seeing a flood of those on social media, some fresh confirmations. Sometimes we have an idea of when guys are going to make it to campus, but we let the kids do their own announcing. Some guys, they have that wish. Others, we let it fly earlier than that. But a lot of additions to that list coming throughout this week. It's a list that's going to continue to grow. Like you mentioned, I'm going to have to go back and count because we might have to update that headline number. It might be over 40 now. But those guys are locked in. Joey O'Brien is May 16th through the 18th. Connor Salmon is June 6th through the 8th. Emmanuel Iheanacho is the following weekend, June 13th through the 15th. Luke Wayfield is also going to be June 13th through the 15th. 4 really important guys to Penn State's recruiting efforts in this 26 cycle.
And just a reminder on a couple of them, Iheanacho is the offensive tackle in this region. 5-star, 330-plus pounds as a rising high school senior. He's just a big-time plug-and-play type talent at the tackle spot. He's going to command a lot in the NIL world as well. And then one of the other names, just to reiterate, Joey O'Brien. Penn State has really laid that foundation for that 2026 class with in-state talent. Minkins is one of those. Obviously, you've got Kevin Brown on board as well from Harrisburg. There's a bunch of guys. Matt Sieg. I mean, you go up and down this class, really represented well in Pennsylvania. He would be, the cherry on the top of that if they can get him on board at the end of it. And again, the Abdul Carter history there with his program, LaSalle College High School, factor that in as well. But let's get to some fresh names so we're not rehashing a lot. And we'll go back down to Texas. We just went down and talked to Mike Roach. Let's go back down and talk about Jordan Deck, big, long safety out of Frisco, Texas at Lone Star High School. You got to love that name. Number 23 safety and a 4-star prospect nationally, and another who has locked in a long-distance official visit to Happy Valley.
Yeah, it's funny. We're talking about all these official visits getting locked in, and a lot of the guys who have locked in official visits, they are vastly familiar names that we have discussed time and time again, whether it be on the podcast, on the board, in articles, whatever it may be. We've touched on a lot of these guys. Now, if you go back and look, a lot of them have been within the region. Sometimes once these OVs start to get locked in around the nation, you start to see some of the more guys outside of Penn State's traditional recruiting footprint. They surface more in the forefront. They surface more as we learn more about positional boards. We're still at that point in the cycle where boards are taking place following junior seasons. Film is still being evaluated during this dead period. You're identifying who your top targets are. And Jordan Deck has stood out as one of those top targets at safety for Anthony Poindexter. Really talented player. Lone Star is actually a place Penn State has recruited before. Jalen Braxton was a standout cornerback coming out of Lone Star down in, I believe it's in Frisco. But, he was a top target of Terry Smith's at one point. He landed elsewhere. I believe he landed at Arkansas. But it's a place where Penn State is familiar. Deck's a really, really good safety. He profiles as one of those do-it-all kind of guys for Poindexter on the back end of his secondary. Has the size, has the speed, has the cover ability, and likes to come down and hit as well. So he's locked in for a Penn State official visit. And really from this point on with the safeties board, we're going to be talking about guys like Deck. We're going to be talking about, Daryl Carey from DeMatha in Maryland and Caden Gebhardt as well. It's been clarified multiple times by Gebhardt at this point. While Tom Allen was the defensive coordinator, it was looking more like linebacker for him. Now the pitch is centered more around safety, and Gebhardt has been he's been really receptive to that. There's no ego to that kid, man. He's going to do whatever is asked of him at the next level, and he's got a good relationship with Poindexter as well. But when it comes to Deck, he's locked in, going to be on campus during that June 6th to 8th weekend, which, as we've touched on, it's one of 2 weekends that is going to be absolutely loaded for Penn State with top targets. It's going to be a very busy time for James Franklin and his staff.
You can't take any vacation time during nosebleeds, can you? We will talk about another out of the region recruit right now, Isaiah Williams, linebacker from down in Florida, top 15 linebacker nationally. He's inside that top 24/7 overall. Florida State, Alabama, Georgia are among programs within that region who would like to keep him in the Southeast. But Penn State's going to get a chance to bring him up here. By then, I think this town will have thawed out because it's going to take a while, but it's going to be warmer. It's going to be beautiful weather, you'd imagine. May, June is awesome here. And he'll get a chance to have that 48-hour dose of life in Happy Valley. we've seen it happen before, Tyler, where a kid comes up from Florida and 48 hours works its magic. And it doesn't always stick to signing day. But does Isaiah Williams project as a player, considering he's got about 40 offers, where he is in the rankings, who Penn State could make that kind of a swing with when they get him up here in State College?
I think he is at this point. I do think he fits that mold. If you look at Williams' top 5, which he released, I believe it was last month, maybe it was earlier in February, but I believe it was last month he released it. Florida, Florida State, Bama, Georgia, Penn State.
One of those schools is not like the other, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, we've even gotten some of our subscribers that said one of these schools doesn't belong on this list. Penn State's the lone Northeast school. And given the way Williams' recruitment has played out in general, it's a pretty interesting one. He was committed to Syracuse early, backed off that, committed to Florida State, backed off that with the Noles in the midst of a rough 2024 season. He's still considering Florida State, though. So, for a couple different reasons, it's been a lot of, all right, I'll believe it when I see it. But now I'm starting to see it with Williams, getting that official visit locked in and asking around where things might stand in his recruitment. I don't want to go as far as saying there's an optimism Penn State will get this one done because, again, Florida kid, his recruitment, it's been a busy one in terms of moving on the commitment front. But I think there's a growing sense of, hey, look, we get this kid to campus. We could work our OV magic that we've shown we can work in the past, especially with kids from down south. Who knows? We have a fighter's chance here. And I think Williams, I think he's in that category at this point. The key step was getting the official visit locked in because his offer went out when Allen was still in place as defensive coordinator. You didn't know where things were going to go post Allen with the linebacker board. That's another board kind of like running back where it's starting to take shape more. It's more in the advanced stages of taking shape compared to the running back board for some pretty obvious timing reasons. Williams has stuck as a top target on that board, and now he's locked in for his OV. Don't forget his name. I'd say if you're a Penn State fan, file him away for now.
This would be a really impressive out-of-region pickup. And I know they've had really impressive out-of-region commitments that haven't quite gotten to the signing day, and that's happened out of Florida. That's happened down in Alabama. We've seen it in the Southeast before. But Williams, if he were to come on board, have you watched this film, Tyler?
I have.
The closing speed and the explosive way that he finishes. I think he's about 6'2", 215, 220 pounds right now as a junior. Just love the way he flies around the field. He moves like a safety, but he has that frame and he has the thickness, I think, ultimately, that he's going to be right at home at linebacker. And I think he shows up on a campus. I don't know if he's a January enrollee or a summer enrollee. To be honest, it might not matter. I think he's a guy who can show up and push to play on special teams and push to play in a two-deep situation at linebacker year one. And look, I trend a little closer in my assessment of Williams toward the composite rankings, which have him as the number 91 overall player in the country, the number 7 player at linebacker, versus our rankings here at 24/7 Sports, where he's 232 and number 15 at linebacker. But either way, you're looking at a highly rated individual here from beyond the region who is making it a point to get to Penn State. And we know the LBU tradition maybe carries some clout nationally as well. Let's go to Virginia now, Loudoun County High School, and a guy that we got to see in camp action up here in Happy Valley last summer, Carter Scruggs. He is the top 10 interior offensive lineman, number 134 overall, considered the number 5 player in the state of Virginia, which has been pretty good to Penn State on the recruiting trail during James Franklin's tenure. So when we look at Scruggs, I know he has a whirlwind of a recruitment in place for himself as well. Bunch of offers beyond the region, within the region. I think probably 3 or 4 power conferences he could end up in. How does Penn State kind of stand on that totem pole of contenders?
I think they're in the upper tier right now. I think that has been the case for a little while. Scruggs has a really good relationship with Phil Troutman and the rest of the staff, and I think that has led to the Nittany Lions standing out among that. He really certainly released a top 12. I think if he was hypothetically to narrow down to a top 5 right now, Penn State would be involved, maybe even a top 3. To be completely honest with you, the intel and the reviews from Scruggs and asking around those who have a pulse on his recruitment, it's been pretty positive for Penn State. I know we didn't make it back to campus during the winter for those 2 junior days, and sometimes we get questions where kids don't make it back during the winter. Where do they stand at that point? Because it's fair to put a lot of weight in junior day visits and, which guys make it, which guys prioritize getting back to Penn State. Some of these other guys, they just want to get out and check out other places. Scruggs fell into that category, but he's going to be back for an in-depth look at Penn State during that June 13th through 15th weekend, which we mentioned that first June 6th through 8th weekend being a busy one in general. Phil Troutman's going to be a busy man 13th through the 15th. He's got almost double-digit offensive line targets rolling through the campus. Scruggs is going to be one of them, and he's a priority.
Yeah, it's been really fun to watch Phil Troutwine go to work. We get to see it on the camp circuit when he's going face to face with these guys and giving them tips and really pushing their limits and trying to test them with the help of Frank Leonard. And then when he gets them here on campus, he just has a way to get it done. I don't know what it'll look like when you've got 10 recruits and 20 different parents on campus and some siblings maybe. It's a lot to juggle. But man, Phil Troutwine has really proven to be a guy who can cast a relatively wide net and then start to get selective. And we've seen what the results have been in that offensive line room the last few years. Tyler, another spot we got to go to on the offensive line is over at Timber Creek High School in South Jersey, not too far from Philadelphia. And that is where one of the coolest names I've come across in the recruiting world. And you brought it to me earlier this week. I'm going to guess it. And if I'm wrong, you tell me how to pronounce it. Roseby Lubintis out of Creek. All right. Sweet. First time's the charm. Roseby Lubintis seems to be a rising figure. We've got him listed at 6'5", 300 pounds, Big 10 offers, Big 12 offers, but not a bunch right now. I think he's got about 5 or so. Penn State is among them. They're getting him to campus, and this is a kid who doesn't even have a photo yet on his 24/7 sports profile. So that's when I know there's a sense that this guy is more of a riser than a known commodity.
Yeah. I would definitely classify him in the riser category. It's funny. I remember when Penn State first offered Lubintis last spring. I believe they were the first program to do so. And it took me back to when Phil Troutwine was at Boston College, the time that we overlapped on that beat. And it took me back to some of the guys he would offer really early in their recruitments at BC. High upside, athletic as hell, can really move. There's a lot for you to work with from a developmental standpoint. I think Lubintis is that guy. I think that the offer sheet doesn't necessarily reflect the upside in terms of quantity. There's plenty of quality on it in terms of Power 5 or Power 4 programs. Q's, Michigan State, West Virginia, Boston College is on there. So there are some Power 4 suitors who are very interested in adding Lubintis. Penn State is one of them. He told me he's going to narrow his list down pretty soon. The direct quote was, "Best believe Penn State's going to be included in that." He's going to be on campus for his official May 30th through June 1st, and he's been moving up the offensive line board. He made it back to campus for a junior day visit before the beginning of the dead period, and anytime a name who hasn't popped up in a while pops up, you start to show a little bit of interest. Penn State paid him a visit during the winter contact period at his high school in South Jersey, and he profiles as a guy. If he wanted to jump on board, conversations would take place, and Penn State would probably welcome him with open arms at this point. Again, athleticism, length, upside. There's a lot for a strength and conditioning coach at the next level to mold wherever Lubintis lands. And we've seen Chuck Losey work wonders with this kind of a body type. So I think that carries a lot of appeal from the Penn State perspective.
You can vouch for this. In terms of South Jersey football, there are a few programs that you can walk through the hallways and probably come across a Power 4 conference recruit like you can at this particular one, Timber Creek. This is a school that perennially is producing recruits. So they got quite a track record over the last decade or so, at least. And Lubintis is another name on the rise there. Tyler, one more name we wanted to get to in our review of some of these additions to the official visit schedule. And again, we have all those names, whether it's 35 or 45 at this point, over at Lions247.com with analysis and updates to come. But Terry Wiggins, an in-state prospect from Coatesville Area High School. He's in the 2026 cycle. We've got him as the number 25 linebacker nationally at 24/7 Sports. And he's someone, when you review his offer sheet, a lot of power conference schools, but not a lot of playoff contenders. And Penn State's one of those. And I think they stand out not just as they're the in-state program, but because of the pedigree that they carry, and the brand of the Nittany Lions really seems to stick out on his offer sheet. Are they like the team right now when you kind of review his recruitment? Is it that simple, or is there more dynamics in play when it comes to Wiggins?
I think Penn State's really high up. I think he needs to collect a little bit more data on his suitors before we get to that point. Right now, looking at his offer sheet, looking at some of the visits he's made, looking at some of the notes we've collected on where his interest may be lying, I think Penn State is the one to beat, but he doesn't profile as inching closer to a commitment. I know Penn State really, really likes him. They think he could be a really good linebacker for them for years. He's got, again, we talk about it with Isaiah Williams. He's not quite the same player, but he's got the athleticism. He's fast. He moves quickly. He's very
He's
agile.
long. He's a long linebacker. I think he's pushing 6'3", 6'3.5", over 200 pounds. He's got that wingspan. He's just got some range to him that you can kind of go get it a little bit at linebacker versus a gap, B gap, pound kind of player.
100%. I'm actually glad you brought up the length too, because I mean, if you go throw on his tape, he takes some snaps on the edge for Coatesville area sometimes. So there's some versatility to his game. That's why I wanted to point out that he's not the same player as Williams, but Penn State projects a similar level of impact. That's how much they like Terry Wiggins. So we'll see if he makes it back to campus during the spring. That's something I anticipate. But for now, June 13th through the 15th, that's when he's locked in for his Penn State official visit. And I think the Nittany Lions have done a lot of good things here early with Wiggins.
And that he's out of the same Coatesville area high school program that you'll find Maxwell Hiller, one of the gems of the 2027 recruiting class. He is the number 3 offensive tackle nationally, number 17 overall player, and considered the number 1 prospect in the state of Pennsylvania. So keep your eye on Coatesville this upcoming fall. They've got some serious talent on the field. Penn State's very interested. Look, we could go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more names deep, but we don't have time for an hour and a half show, Tyler. So anything else to add from the recruiting end of things here at Lions 24/7 before we close up shop with this episode?
Well, it won't be much longer before we start locking in these spring practice visits as well. Spring ball starts a little bit later for Penn State this year following the playoff run. Late March, we're going to dive into things. And throughout April, you're going to see a bunch of guys popping up on campus. We're already starting to get some confirmations in that regard. Nick Abrams, top 24/7 linebacker from McDonough down in Maryland. He was the latest to confirm in that regard earlier this morning. So, we talk a bunch about the OVs. They're being locked in earlier than ever, but don't forget about spring ball. A bunch of guys will be making it to town for those visits, and we'll be on top of it.
About a month away from getting back on the field for practice action. Prospects will join us on the field as well. Tyler Calvaruso does a fantastic job covering Penn State recruiting for us at Lions247.com. Always good to get you on the show, Tyler. We'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Big stuff from Tyler, and before him, Mike Roach, colleagues here at 24/7 Sports. Just a little lay of the land for our upcoming week of coverage here at Lions247.com, the final week of February that awaits us. We will begin it on Monday with Stan Drayton and Pat Kraft at the microphone. We'll hear from Penn State's new running backs coach and Penn State's athletics director on Monday afternoon. You can get our content at Lions247.com. I think our plan is to come back to you with a podcast next Tuesday. So we'll recap some of that. You don't have to wait till then. We'll have video. We'll have a lot of written content over at Lions247.com. And additionally, Saturday, as part of the Thon experience here at Penn State, and huge shout out to anyone who's directly involved with Thon, either now or in the past, and what has this done? One of the greatest charitable efforts I think you'll see on any college campus in America. And the football team naturally is very much involved with that. They're going to have some Thon families, some of these children dealing with rare diseases, and some siblings and parents. They get to walk through Penn State's Lash building with football players, with coaches, and they let some of us reporters in as well to take in some of the action. So really a heartwarming experience. We'll also get a chance to talk football with some Penn State veteran players when that's all done. But we'll have all of that content as well over at Lions247.com over the weekend. Check out our VIP coverage for 30% off right now. For now, I'm stepping away. I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for tuning in to the Lions 24/7 podcast. We'll catch you real soon right here.